You intend to kill Paul?
Regime change.
If you walked out of 2024's Dune Part 2 expecting the next film to be nothing more than another sand and blood war epic with Feyd-Rautha snarling at Paul across an arena, I got some news for you, because Dune Part 3 is about to pull the rug out from under all of us, except maybe the book readers, but I bet there's some surprises coming for them too. This third installment in Denis Villeneuve's Dune trilogy takes its cues from Dune Messiah, Frank Herbert's sequel to his original epic Dune, and you know what that means for the next movie? Paul has already won. He's the emperor of the known universe. His holy war has burned across the stars. The fight for the throne, everything he worked for during the first book and the first two films, is over, and it ended in his favor. Lisan al-Gaib is here to stay, baby. Well, at least for now. Of course, this means that the story stops being about how Paul takes power and becomes about what he does with that power and how it destroys almost everything he loves. The enemy waiting for him in this story doesn't rely on a blade or command an army, he wears other people's faces. His name is Scytale, he's played by Robert Pattinson, and he might just be the most dangerous antagonist this saga has ever produced. He's a shapeshifter and a key agent in a conspiracy against Paul Atreides, and he rewrites what a threat means in the world of Dune. Today, we're breaking down exactly who Scytale is, how his face dancer powers work, what the conspiracy is really after, and why casting Robert Pattinson could turn Part 3 into something closer to a paranoid psychological thriller than a battlefield epic. So grab a seat, because this one gets under your skin in more ways than one. Let's dive on in. Who is Scytale in the Dune books? Before you ask, no, Scytale didn't appear in the first two films, which means this is where the book knowledge is gonna come in handy. Scytale first pops up in Dune Messiah, the second book in the series. By the time he shows up, things are very different from where we left them at the end of the first book. Dune Messiah is set approximately 12 years after the events of Dune, at a point where Paul appears all-powerful after Muad'Dib's jihad has conquered much of the known universe. However, Paul is not freely enacting some perfect vision for humanity, he's trapped by the consequences of his own power, his religion, and the future paths revealed by his prescience. The film pushes the time jump even further. The story of Dune Part 3 takes place approximately 17 years after the previous film, with Paul Atreides ruling as emperor and facing the consequences of his ascent. Either way, the point stands. This is an older and much more vulnerable Paul, sitting on a throne built upon the deaths of billions killed in his name. In the novel, Paul estimates his jihad has killed 61 billion people. Scytale isn't a lord or a conventional soldier or anything you might expect this new antagonist to be. He's actually a face dancer from the Bene Tleilax, and if you thought the Bene Gesserit were terrifying and strange, just wait till you get a load of these guys. They're one of the most secretive factions in the Dune universe, masters of genetic engineering and biotechnology who produce engineered humans, Golas, twisted mentats, and face dancers. While the first two entries on that list are pretty upsetting, the face dancers are perhaps their most horrifying creation. These are engineered shapeshifters who can alter their physical appearance, sex, voice, build, and even mannerisms to impersonate other people with frightening precision. What a beautiful name for something so unsettling. Scytale's entire approach is the opposite of a Harkonnen's. He's not brute force and overt violence, he's not the recognizable face of an opposing house, in fact, he barely has a fixed face of his own. What he does have is patience, disguise, intelligence, and the ability to play a very long game. In the book, he's a master of deception who plots against Emperor Paul Atreides while moving between different identities. He studies people, finds their emotional weaknesses, and uses those weaknesses against them. However, Scytale should not be described as a completely independent rogue, pursuing only his own personal wishes. In Dune Messiah, he operates as an agent and strategist for the Bene Tleilax, even though he has far more intelligence and initiative than an ordinary disposable face dancer. There's also an unusual continuity development in the later novels. Thousands of years after Dune Messiah, a later incarnation of Scytale identified as a Tleilaxu master and eventually became the last known surviving master of the Bene Tleilax. He's held by the Bene Gesserit and possesses a hidden capsule containing genetic material from numerous important historical figures and Tleilaxu masters. The books don't clearly explain how the face dancer from Dune Messiah became or was later remembered as a Tleilaxu master, so it's safer to treat this as a later development in the character's history rather than a simple promotion. It's also worth mentioning how completely different Scytale is from the last major antagonist we met, Feyd-Rautha in Dune Part 2, the nephew and chosen heir of Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. Feyd-Rautha was a menacing spectacle in the black and white arena because his character was essentially brutality made human, with Austin Butler playing him like a predator dialed to the peak. But Scytale is his exact inverse. He's subtle and cerebral, he doesn't announce himself, and he doesn't want a fair fight. He wants to infiltrate Paul's world before the Emperor fully understands that a new threat has arrived. Where Feyd was a threat you could recognize and prepare for, Scytale is a threat that hides within the familiar, and in many ways, that makes him much more dangerous. Face Dancers Explained. How do Scytale's powers work? There's tons of strange things about the Dune universe, but thankfully, most of them can be explained if you try a little, and that includes the Face Dancer's powers. So let's dig in. When I say they're masters of disguise, I don't mean that they wear different wigs and prosthetics to pretend to be someone else. That would be honestly an insult to Herbert's masterful mythos. Face Dancers are specifically engineered shapeshifters who can copy someone's outward appearance, voice, sex, physical build, and unconscious mannerisms, the way they stand, walk, hold a cup, or clear their throat. But their imitation has limits. They don't automatically gain the victim's memories, knowledge, relationships, or private experiences. In Dune Messiah, Scytale must carefully avoid subjects that the real person would remember, but he does not. Basically, they can look and behave almost exactly like you, but they don't literally become you in every conceivable way. Face Dancers have already appeared in other on-screen adaptations of the Dune universe. The concept appeared in the 2003 miniseries Frank Herbert's Children of Dune, whose first section adopted Dune Messiah. There was also a face dancer in HBO's Dune Prophecy with Sister Theodosia, whose secret shapeshifting ability was revealed during the series. So even audiences who aren't readers of the books have already glimpsed the concept, although Scytale's role in Dune Messiah is much larger and more central than anything those previous experiences explored. Scytale's threat is invisible, unpredictable, and deeply personal, because you can never be completely sure whether you're dealing with him or someone whose appearance he's copied. That uncertainty could increase the tension in almost every scene. A servant walks into Paul's chamber, but is it really a servant? An advisor leans in during supper, but is it really the advisor, or is it Scytale wearing the advisor's appearance? The film can theoretically place its antagonist in plain sight without immediately telling us, and Villeneuve will most likely use that uncertainty to create dread for both the characters and the audience. What makes Scytale unusual is not that he's completely free of the Tleilaxu, but that he's intelligent enough to design and execute elaborate operations on their behalf. Rather than spending months secretly earning Paul's trust, as the original draft suggested, Scytale's most important impersonation in the novel is more direct. He murders Lichna, the daughter of Paul's former Fedaykin, Otheym, assumes her appearance, and uses that identity to lure Paul into the conspiracy's trap. His shapeshifting is used for precise infiltration and psychological manipulation, rather than merely for a conventional assassination. Pattinson's appearance in the trailer is striking, showing the character with her appearance. He has her extremely pale skin and platinum blonde hair. The official marketing has also been using visual distortion around Pattinson's image, which appears to tease his unstable identity and shape-shifting abilities. This changes Dune from a story about who can withstand the most pain and who commands the largest army into a story in which identity and trust become part of the battlefield. Essentially, the question stops being, can Paul win the fight? Because we've already seen that he can. Instead, it becomes, can Paul trust anything he sees? This film could be nosediving right into psychological horror, and Scytale is one of the biggest reasons why. The Messiah Conspiracy. How Scytale's plan tries to destroy Paul. Scytale isn't just having fun or acting according to his whims, he's part of a conspiracy involving some of the most powerful forces in the Imperium. The central conspirators in Dune Messiah are Scytale, representing the Bene Tleilax, Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, representing the Bene Gesserit, and the Guild Navigator Edric, representing the Spacing Guild. Princess Irulan is also involved through the Bene Gesserit and her connection to the deposed House Corrino. Separately, a number of disillusioned Fremen, including former members of Paul's Fedaykin, participate in their own conspiracy against his regime. These Fremen rebels overlap with the wider plot, but they should not be treated as though they all attended the same planning council or shared one perfectly unified objective. A common enemy really does unite the strangest of foes because these are factions that would normally not trust one another and have wildly different long-term goals. The Bene Gesserit want control over Paul's bloodline. The Spacing Guild wants to preserve its influence, they want their access to Spiceback, and they want the ability to navigate the future. The Tleilaxu want to test their Gola technology and put Paul under their control. The Fremen conspirators have become disillusioned with Paul's religious empire and the transformation of their culture. They all agree that Paul must be weakened or removed, but they're not all pursuing exactly the same endgame. What makes Scytale so vital to the plot is his ability to get closer to Paul than most conventional enemies could, using disguise and psychological pressure to exploit the Emperor's deepest fears. Specifically, his fears surrounding Chani, played by Zendaya, his family, and his own prophetic visions. That's the real target, not simply Paul's body, but his mind. His faith in what he sees when he looks into the future and the few people left in the universe whom he genuinely loves. The centerpiece of the plot is one of the eeriest ideas in all of Dune, and the trailer has confirmed that a version of it is coming. As part of the conspiracy, a Gola of Paul's fallen friend and protector, Duncan Idaho, is delivered to him. What is a Gola, you ask? Well, it's a recreated human body grown from the cells of someone who died. Initially, the Gola possesses none of the original person's conscious memories. The real Duncan Idaho died while protecting Paul and Jessica in the first film, in case you forgot. Now, the Tleilaxu have brought him back as a memoryless version called Hate, played once again by Jason Momoa, and presented to Paul like a gift. It's obviously a trap dressed up as a kindness, but the plan is more complicated than simply fooling Paul. Hate is intended to destabilize Paul emotionally and has also been conditioned to kill him under very specific circumstances. At the same time, the Tleilaxu are testing whether extreme emotional trauma can restore a Gola's original memories and personality. If they can prove that restoration is possible, Tleilaxu masters could repeatedly recreate themselves in new Gola bodies, achieving a form of practical immortality through restored memory. This is almost like the scientific version of what the Bene Gesserit hope to achieve through the Kwisatz Haderach. But there's also an intensely personal form of enmity unfolding here, because Scytale doesn't simply want Paul dead, he wants Paul compromised, controlled, and broken first. We're not trying to spoil everything here, but what I will tell you is that there is a specifically insane part of the scheme designed to break open the inside of the Emperor's head. And it hinges on another character very close to Paul. Scytale makes an offer and presents it as a solution, but it's one that's impossible for Paul to accept without surrendering everything. He'll do whatever it takes if it means that Paul's power can be destroyed or placed under Tleilaxu control. Without spoiling all the specifics, this is the moment where the conspiracy stops being merely political and becomes unbearably personal. It forces Paul into a choice where every possible answer costs him something he cannot stand to lose. Mind you, it's not all mental torture. In the book, Fremen conspirators use a stone burner against Paul. A stone burner is an atomic-powered weapon that's basically illegal throughout the galaxy thanks to the Great Convention. Its radiation has a peculiar affinity for eye tissue, and the attack destroys Paul's physical eyes along with the eyes of others caught nearby. However, this weapon does not destroy Paul's prescience. After being physically blinded, he continues to navigate through an exact prophetic vision of the path before him. The attack is symbolically powerful because Paul's authority is closely associated with sight, both his literal vision and his ability to perceive possible futures. But it's more accurate to say that the weapon blinds him than to claim that the entire conspiracy specifically designed it as an assault on the concept of messianic sight. Put it all together and you can see the shape of what Part 3 is likely to become. Less open desert warfare and fewer sweeping cavalry charges, more claustrophobic palace corridors, whispered meetings, secret alliances, and the slow tightening of a noose around the neck of a man who no longer controls the consequences of his own power. It's political and psychological horror because Scytale turns what could have been a straightforward conflict for the throne into a mental war against Paul Atreides. He represents part of the bill coming due for the holy war Paul unleashed, an atrocity that, in the novel, killed 61 billion people and devastated entire planets. Why Robert Pattinson's Scytale is the perfect final antagonist. And that brings us to the casting. For my money, Robert Pattinson is frankly one of the finest actors of this generation. Having watched his bizarre yet masterful career for years, I can confidently say that we're in for an incredible performance from him. After appearing alongside Zendaya in The Drama and again in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey in 2026, he's completing a remarkable year with his role as Scytale and all the roles hidden inside that role. And also, this isn't his first villain, by the way, if you're feeling paranoid about that. He played the predatory Reverend Preston Teagarden in The Devil All the Time and the scheming Dauphin in The King. Fun fact, in the latter, many of his scenes are with Timothée Chalamet, who plays Paul in Dune, and the Dauphin spends much of his screen time taunting Chalamet's Henry V. So Pattinson has basically been preparing to play Scytale since 2019. He's spent years building a filmography filled with characters who are slightly off, slightly untrustworthy, and often seem to be performing normality rather than genuinely feeling it. Whether we're talking about The Lighthouse, Mickey 17, The Batman, or even if we're going all the way back to the Twilight Saga, he knows how to play people who are stranger than they initially appear and who deserve much more scrutiny before anyone thinks about trusting them. For a shapeshifter whose entire existence is performance, this is about as appropriate a fit as you could ask for. What makes this casting even more exciting is the way Pattinson discussed the character during the film's promotion. At the trailer reveal event, he described Scytale as an unusual character whose side is difficult to determine. He also said that Scytale isn't a conventional bad guy and joked that the character might even turn out to be a good guy. That ambiguity is precisely what makes Scytale so intriguing. There's also a deeper thematic reason why he matters, and it reaches back to why Herbert wrote Dune Messiah in the first place. Herbert repeatedly described the Dune saga as a warning about charismatic leaders and the danger of surrendering personal judgment to supposedly infallible heroes. Messiah sharpens that critique and makes Paul's moral responsibility impossible to ignore. That'll be difficult to pull off on screen because the general audience has spent 2 films following Paul's rise, and in many cases, rooting for him. The third film, therefore, needs an antagonist magnetic enough to complicate our allegiances and convincing enough to make us question the protagonist. That's exactly what Scytale can do. Scytale applies pressure, not merely physical force, which helps him crack open the legend of Paul's heroism and reveals what has been rotting underneath the myth. Pattinson is the perfect actor to play foil, antagonist, charmer, and manipulator all in one. Scytale makes us look more deeply at a trilogy that has changed its dramatic focus with each film while maintaining a consistent world and tone. Part 1 was about survival, political setup, and a young heir learning the board. Part 2 plunged us into war, prophecy, and the terrible ignition of a holy war. Now, Part 3, with Scytale at its center, could become a story about an all-powerful ruler being slowly strangled by the consequences of his own victory. Paul is not undone simply by larger armies or stronger challengers. He's threatened by face dancers, political conspirators, religious dissent, and the people sitting at the same tables as him. There are no longer obvious enemies whom he can simply outfight, so the real threat is the collapse of his control over destiny, faith, family, and his sense of reality. Pattinson's performance could make that paranoia so much worse, and the footage suggests that Scytale's involvement will have ominous consequences for Paul, Chani, and the future of the Atreides dynasty. So when Dune Part 3 opens, Paul Atreides will already have done the impossible. He led a holy war, toppled an emperor, and established himself as the godlike ruler of the known universe. But Dune Messiah exists to prove one brutal point. Winning the war doesn't mean surviving the aftermath will be clean or easy. Scytale embodies that idea. He is an antagonist who doesn't rely on battlefield combat, a face dancer who can assume other identities, and a Bene Tleilax agent who treats identity itself as a weapon. He's also one of the key architects of a plot designed to break and control Paul from the inside rather than merely assassinate him. Instead of a sandworm or a Harkonnen blade, Scytale's greatest weapon is Paul's own emotional vulnerability and the sick, creeping uncertainty of never quite knowing whether the person across the table is your closest ally or your deadliest enemy wearing a familiar face. Dune Part 3 releases on December 18th, 2026, and Villeneuve is closing out his trilogy not merely with a larger battle, but with what appears to be a colder, quieter, and more intimate form of terror. Because if you can't trust your own mind, who can you trust? And that's who Scytale is. Not a warlord and not a rival waiting in a battle arena, but a being made of borrowed faces walking into Paul's world with a conspiracy in one hand and an impossible gift in the other. My honest thoughts? I think he's going to be one of the most unsettling things this trilogy has ever put to screen, which is saying a lot, right? Let us know in the comments down below whether you're rooting for Paul, Scytale, or somehow both, and you better have an explanation ready if it's the latter, and whether you think Villeneuve will preserve the ending of the novel or soften it. There are still plenty of unanswered questions, but thankfully, December's not too far away. As always, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more stuff like it, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe, and we'll see ya in the next one.